My journey has been really interesting because emotional health has been really, really important, but it's very tied in with physical health because many of you might know that health starts in the gut, and when your gut is out of balance, it creates toxicity that goes up into the brain and creates anxiety and depression. So when I work with clients, I find out how they're eating. I'm sure many of you know, if you've asked your friends, how do you eat? I ask my clients, how do you eat? And they say, oh, my diet's really good. And then I say, well, tell me about it. And it's horrible. And so I know that they can do all the things that I ask them to do on the emotional level, but if they're not taking care of their gut on the physical level, and I'm going to let you guys talk about that a lot, they're not going to get anywhere. So that's basic, is taking care of your gut and eating, of course, really clean, really healthy. So let me talk about the emotional aspect. What healing is knowing who you really are in your soul essence, knowing that you're not your ego, what we call the wounded self in inner bonding, and being able to tap into a higher source of love and truth and wisdom. And so the very first step, Stephen wants steps, very first step in emotional health is to move beyond avoiding your feelings. How many of you do all kinds of things to avoid feeling your feelings? Oh, come on. Come on. Everybody does things. They do things, you do things like you judge yourself. You stay up in your head and you don't connect with your body. You turn to various addictions like food or alcohol or drugs, or you make other people responsible. You blame them for your feelings. So the very first step in emotional health is getting inside your body, moving out. This is a big journey to move out of here and into your heart and soul, because this is where your feelings are. And if you're in your head, you don't know what you're feeling. And emotional health is taking responsibility for your own feelings. Most of our feelings have an enormous amount of information for us. And it's very sad that most people have learned to put a lid on their feelings. And once they do, then they don't want to feel them, and they avoid them with things like junk food. I mean, how many of you have at one time or another, maybe not now, been addicted to sugar or other forms of processed food and junk food? You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to. But many people have been. There's emotional eating. That's what it's about. Emotional eating is about avoiding responsibility for your feelings. And when you learn how to take responsibility for your feelings, you become very motivated to eat well. You become very motivated to create a healthy body for your soul to live in. You become very motivated to learn about who you really are inside. And this is what I teach. So step one is getting into your body, using your breath, using meditation to get present in your body. And then step two is, in the process we teach in our bonding, is that there's only two intentions. One is the intention to learn about loving yourself, and the other is the intention to avoid pain with some form of controlling behavior. So step two, you open to learning. I'm going to be talking a lot about this tomorrow. And step three is you find out what your feelings are telling you. If you're feeling anxious or depressed or angry, these feelings are informational. They're telling you a lot of things, and you have to be willing to find out what they're telling you. Again, we're going to talk about that tomorrow. And then step four is that you're willing to learn how to open to a higher source of love and wisdom and be asking, what's loving? What's loving to me? It's one of the most important questions that you can build into your life moment by moment, is what is loving to me? And then step five is you take that action. What's loving to you, like you would for a child. And then step six, you tune in to how does that feel. So that is what I'm going to be going in a whole lot tomorrow. Thank you. And by the way, I started on this process when I was 22 years old. That was 58 years ago. I'm 80 years old now. And I am in fantastic health with fantastic vitality. So I got to tell you, I know what I'm talking about.
So as a orthomolecular psychiatrist, since the mid-70s, now about 46 years, I've accumulated a certain amount of work working with both people who are psychotic as well as people who are depressed and so forth and so on. In my book, The Depression Free for Life, I talk about a 90% success rate, okay? And feelings are part of it. But what I've also come to realize, even though I'm trained as a psychiatrist, that there is more going on. And I talk about it as the biologically altered brain. So I want to give a little background to that because part of the problem is the brain has been biologically altered. So it's not all psychological. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is unbelievable, but since 1850 till now, we have approximately 100 times more mental disability, meaning people not able to work in relationship to the population. That's very significant. A good part of this has been related to the use of psychotropic drugs. Okay, now I won't go into the whole thing, and there's like hours of discussion about it, but I want to say some very clear things. Research I was involved in since 1972 is that what we know is when people are given psychotropic drugs, as the head of the 1996, Dr. Hyman said, of the NIMH, there is a perturbation in the brain function. Now let's go a little further. This has to do with antipsychotic drugs, it has to do with antidepressant drugs, and it has to do with anti-anxiety drugs. They actually change the structure and function of the brain. And it isn't all that easy to reverse it. But just to give you an example, because there's a mythology out there that it's important to let go of before we can step in to say, well, what can we do? At 90%, we can do a lot better than what they were doing. So the research shows actually people get worse on psychotropic drugs. I was involved in some of the initial research in the 1970s with top people from the National Institute of Mental Health, like Jonathan Coles, who's the head of it. And basically what we found is when people were given antipsychotic drugs, they got worse. What does worse mean? They got better for a few weeks. What does worse mean? It means in the 5-year follow-up, they had a much higher rate of rehospitalization than people have received no medication. Think about that. Because we have a mythology is that people need these things. No, it makes them worse. And it's dose-related, meaning the higher the dose, the more amount of relapse. And that also is true with depression, antidepressant drugs, and also with the anti-anxiety, and also with all the drugs our kids are getting today for, quote, hyperactivity, which translate a little bit further. The antidepressant drugs are associated with a very high rate of moving into manic depressive. Once you're in manic depressive, and we're talking according to the American Psychiatric Association, up to 20% of people who receive antidepressants go into manic depression, and then we're talking about psychosis and more medication. What's the end result? We got 100 times more people on mental disability. So kind of get what we're talking about. Now, that holds true with the anti-anxiety drugs. They look good at 4 weeks. They are better than not. At 8 weeks, it's a break even, and at 23 weeks, all the psychoactive, anti-anxieties like the benzodiazepines and so forth, they actually make you worse. So at 23 weeks, you have more anxiety attacks, more panic attacks. So all the medications people are taking are actually literally and scientifically making people worse. We need to let go of the myth that these things make any difference. And the National Institute of Mental Health has made it clear that all the theories of excess dopamine, excess serotonin, none of them have been proven true. We don't actually know what goes on. As literally, as the head of the National Institute of Mental Health said, Stephen Hyman in 1990, we don't really know what the problem is. Okay, once you get that, then suddenly you're treating things holistically makes a lot more sense, which is what you were talking about, which obviously includes the emotional part, but also includes the nutritional part, includes the building up the neurotransmitters. It includes optimal nutrition. It includes a live food diet. My book, where 90% success rate with depression is a whole 100% vegan and at least an 80% live food diet. It includes avoiding things you're allergic to. I remember in the 70s, somebody got an injection of wheat, and they went psychotic in 15 seconds. It was a course I was taking, and it's like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. 15 seconds and you're psychotic? It really woke me up to the fact that allergies, food allergies, can make a huge difference. It's not just something in your mind, so to speak. It's very real physiologically. And it's also inflamed. So that's the background where we start looking at, okay, what kind of nutrients can we do to rebalance it? One of the things that concerns me is kids as early as 3 years old being put on, anti-hyperactivity things. And that Ritalin has lots of problems, but actually it's like a long-acting cocaine. So when we see the progression, got to understand the word progression here, then the kids are in their teens and they're moving towards cocaine because the Ritalin is not working, but you're having again, as Stephen Hyman says, a perturbation in brain function, a breakdown in brain function. And the longer these kids are on the drugs, the more breakdown in that process. So in the rebuilding of the brain, so one of my subspecialties is slowly taking people off these medications. The brain has downgraded itself in a variety of ways, which I don't need to give you the details, but slowly you have to withdraw. It can take up to 4 months to withdraw. But at the same time, I'm adding these supplements plus in a holistic health point of view, because that's, we have to rebalance all the endocrine system and the neurological system and the neurotransmitters. All are thrown out of balance. So we have to look at all the pictures, and I'm just going to review that again. So,
Dr. Cousens, let's move on. Let's
okay.
Chances. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll come back the next round and talk about on the physical things, but this is kind of an overview for mental, an aspect of mental health. Obviously, emotional mental health is very important, and from a spiritual point of view, the personality is a case of mistaken identity. Think about that for a second.
Let's move on right now.
So we go beyond the mind. So those are your perspectives.
I would just like to add that from the research that I've done, every single mass shooter has been on the psychotropic drugs.
Absolutely. Because it seriously upgrades not only suicidal but homicidal activities. Jonathan Coles, who I study with, actually went to the Ph.D. and said this. They didn't listen. The rate is 3 times to 4 times higher rate of suicide and homicide with the psychotropics. Pretty intense. Yeah.
Certainly for mental health, there's a whole category, I'm sure many of you know about this, called the adaptogens. These are botanicals that have very broad effects like rhodiola rosea, which is now being used by psychiatrists worldwide in place of antidepressant drugs that don't work. With very, very good positive results. We see work coming out of Columbia University Medical Center and New York University Hospital with regard to that. We also see with the herbal extract ashwagandha, which I'll be speaking about tomorrow morning quite a bit, greatly improved mental function, improved clarity of thought, improved recall, short-term and long-term memory, thought formation, the ability to perform mental work, and greatly reduced stress. With plant medicines, and don't worry, I won't go on forever about this, I'll be brief, but plant medicines are not like pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are typically one single molecular compound with a desired target. They're supposed to do something in your body. Botanicals may have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 different compounds, thereby working in the body in a variety of ways. And specifically, rhodiola rosea and ashwagandha demonstrate profound benefits for overall function, cardiovascular system, immune system, kidney health, liver detoxification, brain function, and more, with virtually no toxicity. When you look at the long-term use of these, ashwagandha enjoying about 4,000 years of use that we know of among hundreds of millions of people with a great safety record, and rhodiola rosea probably an equal amount of time and probably somewhat less of a number, but still immense. We see that we have in these two botanicals great aid not only for overall energy, endurance, and stamina, but also for improved mood, for improved mental clarity, and for an overall better feeling. And just to close on this, when you can take an herb that you can feel, then you really get that plant medicine works. If you take milk thistle to detoxify your liver, hopefully nobody goes, wow, I can really feel those Billy Verdens and Billy Rubens working in my liver right now. That's crazy talk. But when you have more energy, when you sleep better, when your sex life is better, when you get up in the morning, feel thoroughly rested, when you've got enough of whatever you need to power through the day, when you're more inspired and when you're happier, that's an experience. And when you get the right botanicals, you can have that experience. These are not cure-alls. These will not solve all your emotional problems. These will not take care of every little thing. But they can, if you stay with them, radically improve the quality of your life in remarkable and positive ways. Thank you.
From an integrative perspective, going back to the original question, because I know that we're talking about brain health, but I just want to say, in general, you're talking about if you were to go to someone's house and look in their cupboard, right? So going back to the original question, I'm always looking at first, since that's my area of specialty, is what is the person taking to lower their inflammatory exposure or their inflammation in their body. I'll be giving a lecture tomorrow at 4, so hopefully you come and listen to it, or you can take a look at my book, An Inflammation Nation, to learn more about that. Also looking at things that are strengthening your immune system, right? Because it's always about lowering inflammation, increasing your immune system. If there's any problems with the patient's microbiome, or if someone has gut problems, making sure that there's some kind of product or aspect in that area. Adaptogens are very important, so I do definitely agree with what they were talking about before. But when we have the appropriate guidance, when we go to learn about plant medicines, then we like to look at plant medicines as they were designed to be delivered. And so certain adaptogens are given at certain ages, actually, and certain times of the year. And so we go one step further when we have the understanding of not just understanding that this is a class of plants that are good and they're relatively safe and they're effective, but we like to then look at how the traditional medicines were prescribed. And that's sometimes lost in the supplement industry, because you'll see tons of formulas or tons of things, or just, you'll probably see it as well, tons of adaptogen formulas or tons of tinctures, and they all can have wonderful benefits, but we like to go a little bit further and say, how can we then maximize the use of those things? So when it comes to nutrients, for example, we test for those things, because it's not just saying we do need to eat a whole food plant-based diet, number one, and I'll talk about foods that trigger inflammation tomorrow, but what we like to look at further on is supplements are supplementing the diet, but they're never replacing the diet. So we can never look at redundancy. I don't look like, don't take a supplement that you're pretty much eating. I look at that way. Now, we like to test for the level, so if there's a deficiency, then that's when supplementation is magical, because then it means the body was needing it, or the person's microbiome was dysfunctional in absorbing it, or they just couldn't get access, or they're not eating enough of that. But we can then design a program by looking at testing and looking at which foods have those nutrients, so that we can really be guided on giving food as medicine. And then when we take plant medicines, we like to make sure that their potency, purity, safety, and efficacy is assured, so we can deliver it as plant medicines.
Well, we were asked about which nutrients might be good to have. My way of learning which nutrients we might be low in is by using my dietary analysis software that I've been writing for decades. And so I plug in for you what you ate and how much you ate of each thing during a day and drank. And then I plug it into the software, and I can see if you got enough selenium or zinc or any of the other things. Now, when I test vegans, and also reading the literature too gives me good insight on what vegans might need, and the fact that I've been a vegan for now 50 years, thank you. I see that vegans tend to be low in calcium. And so I make an effort to get enough calcium in my diet. And there are many foods that have calcium in them. Sesame seeds or sesame tahini, a great way to get calcium. Organic tofu has a lot of calcium in it. Greens have calcium, all the greens. There's nuts and seeds often have calcium too. But when you add it all up, typically vegans get about 550 milligrams of calcium, maybe as much as 700 milligrams of calcium a day. And yet, the World Health Organization has an estimate for low protein diets where you don't need as much calcium as you do on a high protein diet, like an American diet. So on a low protein diet, I'd say you need about 800 milligrams. In other words, I fall short every day, and it's a rare day when I cross 800, or any vegan that I've ever analyzed crosses 800. Some raw fooders with lots of nuts and seeds manage to cross that barrier, but it's kind of hard. So what do? Well, I actually supplement my calcium every day to make sure that it's enough, because strong bones are really important. We don't want osteoporosis, and broken hips can be just a devastating impact on a person's life. So make sure you get enough calcium, calculate it if you can, and supplement it if you need to. But the number one supplement for calcium is calcium carbonate, which most doctors recommend, but the absorption may be as low as 3%. So if you take 1,000 milligrams of calcium carbonate, you may be actually absorbing about 30. And that's not a very big dent in the 1,000 you may need. So make sure the form is good. There are many forms of calcium that I outline in my book, Vitamins and Minerals, Demystified, from both food and from plants. Another thing I find low in vegans and other people too is the omega-3s that were mentioned. And omega-3s are vitally important. Flax powder, if you grind up flax, is one of the nice ways to get omega-3s. From that, you get the plant-based alpha-linolenic acid. This is the basic plant omega-3. In our bodies, we are all able to transform this into EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and then transform that into DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. I wrote a whole chapter in my book, Fats and Oils Demystified, that covers the conversion in the human body from ALA to EPA. Now, we need these long-chain fatty acids like EPA to form the basis for eicosanoids. And the omega-3 eicosanoids are able to quench inflammation. They are able to quench pain, painful prostaglandins. Their ability to be transformed into leukotrienes is very good for lowering inflammation. They are absolutely essential. Some people have some trouble making EPA from ALA. There are quite a few different nutrients that are needed for this process to occur. It's a three-step process. The first step, the enzyme, delta-6 desaturase, changes it to add one more unsaturated bond. Now, it's interesting that there's a seed called echium seeds that contains stearidonic acid, which is what results from that first step. That's the limiting step of rate that limits our ability to make EPA from ALA. In other words, if you can do it, make your EPA from ALA. One reason is that when you take a supplement, even if it's algae-based, it's very likely to be rancid. And rancid long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids can lead to DNA adducts and cancer and malondialdehyde. They are very unhealthy. The other reason, of course, with fish oil is that they're very heavily polluted, just like the fish are. And many of the pollutants, like PCBs, the polychlorinated biphenyls, concentrate in the fish oil. So it's hard to find a fish oil that's not heavily polluted. And even the algae oils may. Krill oil, for instance, absorbs fluorine and is a high source of that. It can be dangerous. Other things that vegans might be low on if they're eating especially, you mentioned a super low-fat diet, can be a real problem with vitamin E, because vitamin E is something that's found in fatty foods like nuts and seeds and avocados and olives. And it's important to eat those foods if you want to get enough vitamin E, which 93% of Americans are deficient in. So you might consider supplementing vitamin E either with walnuts and sunflower seeds are two great sources, or if necessary with a supplement. But with the vast, vast majority of supplements providing only a synthetic fake vitamin E that is not helpful at all and possibly slightly harmful, it's the synthetic alpha tocopherol is a mixture of 8 isomers, only one of which is the real alpha tocopherol. The others are fake. And so I cannot think of a commercial vitamin with vitamin E, and I know why, because it costs quite a bit more. It costs as much for the real vitamin E in the brain and body food supplement I make as it does for everything else in the multivitamin. It's just, that's why manufacturers don't use it. So vitamin E could be low on a vegan diet. Sometimes I even want to supplement with vitamin C. And the reason is that, as has been pointed out, our food has been hybridized. It's been changed to taste better, to be more watery and sweet than it used to be originally. I mean, wild lettuce is very bitter, but modern lettuce is pretty sweet and tasty. Well, this has degraded the nutrients in the food too. So I find that vitamin C in the wild, a person could eat 1,200 milligrams per day. But what we get as the most whole plant food vegan is perhaps 400 milligrams per day. So I choose to supplement vitamin C as well. And this is very easy to do. It's quite safe, and it has a lot of good effects on the human body. Now, 2 more things about vegan supplementation. We really need to get vitamin B12. And since we don't get it in our food, we need to supplement it. So I use 200 micrograms of the methylcobalamin form of vitamin B12. And it's also vital that we get folate. Now, most vegan diets are replete with folate because we eat lots of greens and beans. And that's where folate's found, also nuts and seeds. So no problem if you're eating those, but if you're not, then you're going to need it. There's obviously lots more you could say about the vitamins and minerals and essential factors that humans might need. Those trace minerals like selenium and zinc, those are also very important too. Okay, I think that's about a wrap for vegan nutrition. Thank you.
I just want to add a few little points. First of all, iodine is really good for brain, and more important, nutrition for mitochondria. So a lot of people are depleted because of all that's going on there, and there's 3 key supplements I would recommend, iodine being 1, D-ribose being 2, and then CoQ10 PQQ. They're all specific for rebuilding the mitochondria, for regenerating them. That's important. And then antioxidants, because there's so much free radicals being created in our environment today that a broad range of antioxidants is really important to do. One of the better ones is astaxanthin. It's very, very potent antioxidant. But the whole idea is we are hit by a lot of things that are creating free radicals, and they destroy the mitochondria. So to protect your mitochondria, those are the basics I would recommend for that.
Totally agree. And also, he mentioned the carotenoids, and that's something that we should get on a good plant-based diet. We should get plenty of colorful carotenoids in our food, and we do. But they're fat-soluble nutrients, and also interesting, you mentioned the super low-fat diets, very difficult to digest and absorb the carotenoids or the vitamin E or any of the fat-soluble nutrients. And of course, we mustn't forget vitamin D, essential for brain health. Vitamin D3 is something that should be supplemented. I agree that we probably shouldn't go over 400 IUs a day or 1,000 micrograms a day, but we shouldn't go too far under it either, especially in this kind of a climate. Thank you.
Something we talked about, mitochondria, which is an interesting enough story, I'll repeat it. It's when you check mitochondria, it's not human DNA. It's not something that came out of our evolutionary process. So this was a life form or a parasite, for the lack of a better term, that adapted itself to the human body and literally hijacked and took over your cells. You have about 100 trillion cells in your body, and this is in every cell the energy source and, in a way, the mind of the cell. The jet fuel for that is glutathione. I think the most important work that's been done on nutritional science, other than the discovery of phytochemicals that really took over in 1980s, 1990s, is glutathione. And when we IV that, our medical team IVs that into people, and then we have an oral form now that works, what that does to change people's health. And again, I'm used to working with catastrophically ill people and catastrophically sensible people. So either superstar athletes or somebody who's told they have 5 weeks to live. And we watch glutathione as being an important part of that. And some foods have it. Avocado have it in it. Raw asparagus have it in it. Beet greens have it in it. But to do your body justice and to get you back to health again, you need to supplement on that one. I would like to comment on what you said. There's a major difference between cooked vegan diets and a green living food diet by Hippocrates. Looking at 17,000 and a half people, I don't find people on the Hippocrates green sprout diet lacking calcium. This has so much calcium and usable calcium, it's unbelievable. Vitamin D is something, the more I study that, the more impressed I am with it. Vitamin D is really important. We actually make a supplement made out of a vine. It's the only one that in 100% of cases over the last year we've observed it correct vitamin D problems. It's made out of a vine, not lanolin from a sheep or not shiitake mushrooms. I make a protein powder that's based on the protein of a shiitake mushroom to boost the immune system, but it only has minuscule amounts of vitamin D. Another thing I would consider to be incredibly important is proteins that you're getting on an ongoing basis. And one thing they can't screw up in the supplement industry is protein. There's sort of a structure that's easy to replicate. But you can get that from a diet that basically has comprehensive amino acids in it, all the 8 or 9 or 10 essential amino acids that the body requires. And when you look at supplementing with proteins, make sure they're extracts from things like algae. For instance, the B12 we make 100% alive. When we take microscopes and look at it, it's dancing underneath there. We get our methylcyabolamine not out of a chemical laboratory, but out of blue-green algae. And that works wildly different than a methyl that you get out of a laboratory. So that's about what I have to say, but rather than emphasize what vegans are deficient in, I think we'd agree, Doctor, we're the least deficient of anyone, and raw vegans are substantially less deficient in anything than anyone, and B12 is the only thing that people who eat like me really need, although I take 35 raw food supplements a day, because I'm happy being alive.
The next question I'd like to ask is for everyone. And Margaret, you have seen private, I guess, patients, we can call them, for 40 years, 50. You speak to people, you're a very trusted and wise woman, and people trust you more than anyone that they in their whole life. You're their therapist, they come to you for complete confidentiality. So you hear the deepest, most confidential information of anyone in society. So the question is, regarding sex drive, what is the reality for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s? What should their realistic expectation be? And then the question for everyone else is, aside from what can be done from a nutritional plant, herb, supplement, with that. So I guess we could start with the question with women, and then you could also talk about men's sex drive, and then from the emotional standpoint, and then if anyone else wants to comment from the plant nutritional side.
So it's really important to understand that men and women are very different when it comes to their sexuality. Men have testosterone, which motivates them to have sex for most of their life. Women reach their peak in their mid-30s, but what happens for women, and I see this all the time with the couples that I work with, is that what motivates women sexually is very, very different than what motivates most men. I mean, this is not across the board, because sometimes it's the reverse. But women get turned on by connection, by intimacy, by being seen, by being valued, by romance. And men can often be with their partner, watch TV, and then want to have sex. And
It was a dirty show.
and most women can't do that. They need time with their partner. They need fun. They need talking. They need to be seen. They need to be valued. They need to be heard. And this is something that I deal with all the time, because almost every couple that I work with, one partner is complaining about a lack of sex. Now, most of the time, it's the man who's complaining, but once in a while, it's the woman, because she actually may have more testosterone than he does, and he may be the person who wants the intimacy, who wants the emotional connection. So it can happen both ways. But so many of the men say, well, I get my connection through sex. But the women can't feel sexual until they have the connection. And then the men say, well, why do I have to do it her way? But that's the way it's gonna be, because she's just not going to be turned on if there's not the connection. The emotional connection, the spiritual connection. If she doesn't feel loved and cared for, there's no way that she's going to be able to access her sexuality, and especially after having children. Now, of course, food makes a big difference, because, if you're eating junk, your energy is going to be too low. You're going to be too tired, especially if you have kids. You're going to be wiped out. Nobody feels like having sex when they're wiped out. And so food plays a very big part in this in terms of energy. But even the people that I see who are eating really, really well and are physically very healthy, if they don't know how to have a connection with each other, if they haven't learned to do that, if they haven't learned to resolve conflict in a way where they're learning about themselves and each other, and they feel that deep connection, most of the time, one or the other, and usually it's the woman, is not going to feel like having sex. And of course, that creates a big problem for the man, because he's got the testosterone, he's got the drive. And, of course he wants to have sex. There's nothing wrong with that. But they have to learn to connect. And that is what I work with when I work with couples, is helping them understand what it really means to create that deeper level of connection. And it's amazing what happens when people start to do that. All of a sudden, people who have not had sex for months or even years are starting to have sex again, because it's a natural outgrowth of that emotional connection.
I'll jump in here. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Hot Plants. I spent a few decades traveling the world investigating, I still do this, but I spent a few decades investigating plants all around the world, and everywhere I went, I would encounter plants that were, among other things, legendary for enhancing sex somehow. And there are, and I completely respect what you say about the emotional connection. I mean, obviously that's an essential. A Hawaiian elder once said a marvelous thing. He said, true healing puts into order the body, mind, and spirit with the past, the present, and the future. You can throw all the vitamins and fiber and wheatgrass at yourself that you want, but if you don't have a whole body, mind, spirit thing going on, it's not going to do much except maybe make your skin look better, okay? But that's the reality. And so the emotional connection is super important. Finding ways to open yourself up just naturally that can include meditation and yoga, something Gabriel knows about. I'm in my 50th year of daily yoga practice. I understand the value of that. But there are also botanicals out there that make a difference. I meet men and women who want to be more aroused than they are. And maca is phenomenal for that. Maca is a turnip-like plant. I've worked with it for 22 years in the Peruvian Andes now, though I don't derive money from its trade. And it is a staple food among the people in the Andes. It's made into, it actually looks like a turnip, but you dry it and then you grind it into flour, and it's used in hot drinks, cold drinks, breads, cookies, cakes, pastries, soups, sauces, you name it. And it does, in fact, get you aroused. And it appears to do this to the extent that we understand this by acting on the sex centers of the brain. Rhodiola rosea, which I mentioned before, has very good studies for enhancing both male and female sexual function in a variety of ways. A new study that came out on ashwagandha last year showed that in women, it enhanced arousal, lubrication, comfort of intercourse, and quality of orgasm. Not bad. We see Tonkat Ali from Malaysia, not to be confused with a popular boxer, Tonkat Ali, which is a tree root that has pretty profound effects in terms of boosting testosterone and enhancing erectile function. We saw three, I think, spectacular erectile function studies with red ginseng extract in large quantities a few years back. So there are botanicals that, I mean, if you don't have the connection going on with your partner, then it's kind of just, meat slapping. But if you're, for really, let's get serious here. But if you're actually, wanting to, you need a little help, and that happens with aging, then there are botanicals that can make a significant difference that are safe. The most recent so-called female Viagra drug, which they're all failures, of course, because they don't address anything that you're talking about. What you're supposed to do is right before you're about to have intercourse, you're supposed to stab yourself with a hypodermic needle to get yourself going. If anything is going to reduce the possibility of arousal, it is, unless you're like really weirdly kinky, it is stabbing yourself right before intercourse. So in addition to the emotional connection, in addition to proper nutrition, in addition to drinking water, clean water and breathing pure air and getting exercise and all the things that matter, there are herbs out there that can make a difference, that can support your sexual health. Many of them enjoy human clinical studies, and they're well worth looking into.
May I mention one more? Damiana is a botanical widely used by women that tends to warm up the core of a woman, and this has helped some women to heat up.
I couldn't disagree more strongly. That Damiana was a 1948 marketing scam by a Chicago company that came up with the idea that if they used this herb from Mexico that never had a history of sexual use, and they positioned it as the Mexican sex secret, they could make a lot of money, and they did. Varro Tyler, the very famous pharmacognosist, wrote about this extensively, and respectfully, Damiana has no sexual value whatsoever.
I'd like to say like to say one more thing about sex. I've had couples where, let's say the man is in a high-powered job, and the woman goes to see him at work, and she's so turned on to him. Boy, he's in his power, and she just really enjoys watching him. And then he comes home, and he becomes a needy little boy. And she is not turned on to little boys. And so one of the things that women need is she needs him to be in his power emotionally, not just financially, not just at work, but she needs him to come to her full of love, not trying to get love, which is what's happening a lot of times. I need to have sex to get filled up. I need to have sex to go to sleep. I need to have an orgasm because I have a big talk tomorrow. You got to give it to me. That's not a turn on. And so she needs him to come to her in his power, which means he has learned to take responsibility for filling himself up with love, to share with her. He's not coming to get love from her. There's a huge difference.
The question is, part one is, can herbs or something be used instead of antibiotics, and which herbs, and are they as effective, and do they use antibiotics or something else in the 200 other countries outside the United States? So one is, if you have an infection, do you need antibiotics, or is there some alternative? That's the first part. The second question is, do you need probiotics after you've taken antibiotics? Is that what you're supposed to do? And then the third part is, in general, if you've screwed up your gut microbiome over the years with antibiotics and poor living, what do you do? And then the fourth part is, assume you listen to all these answers and you think you've got some great information, and this part's for you, Margaret, and you go home and you tell your partner, and your partner's completely emotionally shut down to you. So the first three parts are nutritional, and the fourth is, what do you do when you have a partner who is emotionally shut down to this information and a lot of your life? They're pretty much emotionally shut down, and it's very lonely. What do you do about it? So that's the question for everyone.
You know, there's nothing you can do about somebody who's not open to learning about what's important to you and what may be important to them physically and emotionally and in the relationship. And one of the things that happens so often is people go in to try and convince somebody. The best way is to role model it. The best way is to learn to take responsibility for yourself. If you're excited about this, go home and do it. You don't have to convince somebody. But if you do it and you start to feel better, you have more vitality, you're more alive, you're more loving, you're more really into life, they're going to eventually, hopefully say, gee, I wonder what you're doing. We have to let go of trying to control other people and become the role models.
But also the happiest people I see are people who have community. When I go to places, native places, and I do so all the time, the conspicuous thing is people who don't have a lot, who give more than you could ever possibly imagine and take care of each other and are fundamentally and happy in ways that so many people in our culture who are feeling isolated and alone will never, ever be happy. And if you're not happy, who gives a crap if your digestion's good? Seriously. Love people. One of the best ways to be more emotionally healthy is to serve people. I've been very, very fortunate and grateful to engage in a lot of projects, free dental. I mean, we had this colossal, almost Fitzcarraldo-like project. For years, we did a free dental boat in the Amazon. Don't get me started on how difficult that was and how absolutely bring tears to your eyes rewarding it was to pull up to riverfront villages and give them the first dentistry they had ever had in their lives entirely free. And more projects, rebuilding schools. And this isn't about, blowing my horn. This is about making connections with people, when you actually help and serve people, what happens is, unless you really, really try hard to be completely emotionally resistant, you wind up making the kinds of connections that we've been talking about. And you get to understand people, and that fosters a greater sense of, goodness between people, and it bridges misunderstanding, and it helps a host of things that vitamins and minerals and all the enzymes and probiotics and wheatgrass can't possibly begin to get to. So in addition to all the foundational physical, dietary, herbal health things, do not forget the wisdom that we have garnered over thousands of years. Meditate, for goodness sake. Sit down, be quiet, calm your mind. You will develop neural pathways that you didn't have before. You'll develop new habits that are healthier. You'll open your mind. You'll expand your vistas. You'll feel more stress-free. You'll feel more solid inside. You'll feel more competent and aware. This will happen. Make sure you spend time with the people you love. You got kids, spend time with them. You got a partner, spend time with them. You got a community, spend time with them. If we do these things, body, mind, and spirit, we will live good, happy lives. If we neglect any of these major components, we will always suffer.
I would like to say that one of the major things that people need to learn to do is to take responsibility for themselves. It's just too easy to be a victim. It's too easy to give our power away to other people, to professionals, and say, well, my doctor or my therapist or this person told me to do it. We need to learn to trust ourselves. We need to learn to trust our feelings. We need to learn to trust our higher guidance, which is here for all of us. And when we are unwilling to take responsibility for ourselves is when we have problems. That's when we get sick, because we're not taking the time to do the reading we need to do, to understand what we each need. We are each very, very different. There is no blueprint for everybody. What works for me might not work for you on the physical level, emotional level, or spiritual level. And so this is what I teach. I teach people how to learn to take responsibility for themselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I work with many people who know how to eat well. They know what to do. They know how to exercise. They know how to meditate. They don't do it. They're in resistance. They're afraid that they're going to be controlled by somebody, even by themselves or by spirit. And so they don't do it. And this is a very, very big problem for a lot of people. They know what to do, but they don't do it because they have never learned what it means to love themselves. And this is what is so, so vitally important. When you learn to love who you are, your essence, when you love your body, when you love your higher guidance, it is very, very easy to take the loving actions that you need to take.
Being blessed to work with so many people over the time I've done this, I realize that there's 3 letters that everyone aspires to and needs. Personal, P, plus P, passion, equals success. So I think what really is missing with a lot of us, when we were brought up, you were told to survive, what kind of job are you going to get, be responsible, and we're not being responsible. And we've lost ourselves, and very few people live a passionate life. But everyone you've ever seen and admired, the most successful people in the world, they all have P plus P equals S. There's not one of these people. So when you think about people like Elon Musk, he has P plus P equals S. When you see Mahatma Gandhi, it was that way. When I see people recover from catastrophic cancers, that's what they have. When I see people who have great marriages, both of the partners have that. So you may say, I'm too old to find my passion, I'm still a little lost. You're never too old. The story I'll tell before I move on is about 30 years ago, we had a woman come to us. She was in her mid-50s at the time, and she was really distraught. And had been very successful as an accountant, and her 2 daughters were growing and married, and she was happy with all of that, but she was just really, really, it's like a vacuum cleaner of energy. When you got near her, you could feel her draining your energy. And I felt bad for her, but I didn't know what to do, and I felt uncomfortable around her. And she then sort of loosened up, and she said, when I was a little girl, I was a prima ballerina right here in New York. And my parents had captured me and taken us out of the Holocaust. And she said, although I was destined to be one of the top ballerinas in my generation, they were asking me to come on tours worldwide as a child. My mother kept saying, you can't do that. You're going to starve. You can't possibly survive. And after a while, you won't be able to dance. So you've got to find another, and in a way forced her, she felt they were forcing her into going to school and becoming an accountant. And she was so sad her whole life. And she said, can you help me? And I said, you know, I'm not sure, but why don't you try being a ballerina? Now, she's in her mid-50s. So I don't see her for about 2 years, and she comes and knocks on my door at the Institute. And she was hired by the Washington, D.C. Ballet, the oldest woman at that time in history, and danced worldwide with them. And what a difference in this woman. Not only did her disease go away that she had when she came, the cancer, the bone cancer that spread from her liver, but when she went to Miami and couldn't find a suitable vegan restaurant, she opened that up just for fun. P plus P equals success. Personal passion equals success.
In my world, which is very spiritually focused, I see it a little bit from the top down. So I see connecting with our soul as being primary, connecting with God as being primary, and that affecting how we relate to our mind. So that's why I say that the personality, which includes the mind, is a case of mistaken identity. When we're identifying with the deeper truth of who we are, we're less likely to be agitated by our mind. Okay, and how we are in our mind and how we are in our spirit profoundly affects our physiological state. That's been proven over and over again. So by focusing on the mind and the divine, we create the best operating field for our bodies and also for our emotions. Now, where it comes out of focusing on the mind and, in a sense, the spirit, is loving ourselves. And so a fundamental to the whole process is loving yourself enough to want to heal yourself. So I have an approach that kind of covers this, and I call it the natural way of living that leads you to liberation, natural way of living. And that includes 100% vegan diet, at least 80% raw at least, and fasting a week twice a year. It also includes building what we call the chi or prana or nephesh, pranayama, and yoga, which we're doing tomorrow starting at 7, and Tai Chi, Qigong. It includes service and charity, myself, because I don't tell you anything I'm not going to do. We have over 116 different humanitarian programs in 16 different countries. So service and charity opens the heart, helps you connect to other people. That was very eloquently stated. Thank you. And then we look at working with mentors, group support, and so forth. And then meditating. We know that people who meditate just even for 5 years have a physiology that's 15 years younger, okay? And then finally just focusing on God. Now that's the 6 foundations. The sevenfold peace is peace with the body, peace with the mind, and also peace with the family. So do we have the right relationship with our family? Whatever that is, we need to be at peace with it. Peace with the larger community. A lot of chaos in the world today. How do we have the right détente, the right peace with that? Peace with all cultures, from the Native American way, peace with the living planet, peace with the plant world, and peace with the animal world. And of course, vegan helps a big way that, right? And peace with the human cultures. And then we have peace with all the different cultures. Then we're looking at peace with the ecology and peace with God. And we have all those 13 integrated. Then we have a total health program of a way of being. And when we're at peace at that level, because peace is very important for a quiet mind and so forth, then we're able to access the truth of who we are, and we're able to love ourselves enough to want to heal ourselves. Blessings to everyone.
Namaste.